Welcome to the DrumChats podcast, where we're talking anything and everything to do with drums. Today's topic, Drumheads. Here are your hosts, Travis Davis and Dave Douglas.
Hey everybody, you're listening to Drum Chats. This is Travis and Dave, and today we're talking about drum heads and everything that goes into drum heads and different types of drum heads, so Dave and I can talk about the differences and kind of see what all's out there. Dave, how are you, man?
Yeah, I'm really good. I'm really good. It was fun looking into this stuff a little bit. I didn't spend like a crazy amount of time checking it out, but I did do a little refresher course myself.
Yeah.
And it was fun. Every once in a while, you know, I mean, as a drummer, like you kind of get into all the things that you like. And like specifically with heads, you kind of have your normal heads that you kind of like are your go-tos. And, so it's, I don't like experiment with heads and things like that as much as I would like to. So it was really cool to just kind of check it out and kind of get some new ideas, actually, what I want to go buy now.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, anyway, I guess the first thing that I thought maybe we could just talk about are just like the manufacturing of, not actually that manufacturing of heads, but like what companies make them, just kind of big picture. I'm a Remo guy. I don't know what you are. What are you?
Remo. Yeah, all the way.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go. Show's over. Yeah. So I know Remo heads more than other companies, but that's obviously one of the big ones. Evans is, of course, a super well-known one. Mm-hmm. And I kind of throw Aquarian in there and kind of like the big three, Remo, Evans, and Aquarian. Yeah. I don't know. Aquarian is definitely not, as well-known and maybe not as prolific as Remo and Evans, but I feel like it's one of kind of the well-known ones still.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think that those are the three. If you were to go to Guitar Center, those are the three heads you're going to see on the shelf. And
yeah, what are some other ones? There's like Attack. Have you heard of that one before?
I'm looking at that right now. I've never heard of Attack. And then there's other companies like, I don't know if they're custom drum companies like Imperial Drums, Carrillo, Slam. I've never heard of them. I've never heard of Attack either. Unfortunately,
I've heard of Attack, but I kind of have. Sorry if you work at Attack, but I feel like Attack is like the drum head that comes on like a cheap drum when you buy it. It's like the one that's on there.
Yeah.
That's probably wrong. I don't know. That's probably wrong.
But I mean, it makes sense to think. Yeah, it looks like they're not. I'm looking at their website. I can't really tell if they're American or not, but I'm gonna say not. I'm not sure, but if you have any experience with Attack drum heads, please reach out to us and let us know what you think, because we had no idea.
Definitely shoot us an email or something and let us know what you think. The other one that I actually came across that I thought was kind of interesting is this company called Earth Tone. Did you see that?
I saw that on this list on Wikipedia, but they don't have. I couldn't find a website or anything. Did you find something?
Yeah, just for a second. Like I looked at it just for a second, but I think they exclusively deal in real calfskin heads.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I think they're like, pretty specialized, obviously, like if you're using like real calfskin, especially for like a drum set,
So they, okay. I was going to ask if they were doing just like world percussion or if they actually did drum sets as well.
They actually have like drum set, heads.
Oh, wow.
That are real calfskin, and they're pretty expensive. It's like I would think a 14-inch head is like $40 or something.
Ooh, goodness.
So they're like probably like almost, I don't know, like 3 times as much, maybe definitely twice as much.
Yeah.
But probably more than twice as much. But I bet that would be super interesting to play around with, although it kind of weirds me out, to be honest, like real calfskin.
Yeah.
I have a djembe, and that has real calfskin on it.
Right.
But for whatever reason, like with the world drums, world percussion stuff, it feels like very fitting, and it doesn't seem strange to me, but throwing actual calfskins on my drum kit,
it seems taboo, crazy. Right?
Yeah, it's just like, don't we have like we can fake that with like fiber skins or something now. So,
yeah.
But yeah, so anyway, so there are like a bunch of other drum head companies out there.
Yeah.
And I bet there's a lot of really great products. I just am not familiar with those companies or their products, but some people are, obviously.
Yeah. Well, I was looking at Remo's website, and I was just scrolling through and just trying to educate myself a little bit on the different drum heads and different options. And just on Remo's site alone, there's got to be like 30 or 40 options. like ones I've never heard of. Like there's chrome heads and gold chrome heads and like black chrome suede, like all these different heads. And I've heard of black suede and stuff. Yeah, it's
like kind of out of control. I actually, whenever I look at like Remo or Evans or any of those websites, it's just like an absurd amount of information. And in my head, I'm like, if you look into them and kind of click on them and see like, oh, how many plies there are and like what the specs are on them, they're all like this tiniest little variations of, it's like variations on a theme,
Right.
And it's amazing to me that they even offer that many, because in my head, I'm just like, can they possibly be that different? Like, couldn't they like whittle their selection down? I don't know. Maybe, I don't know if it's like a thing that they feel like offering more options is like, makes people feel like the heads are more specialized, or I don't know what the goal is there. I mean, I suppose they're different, I suppose people who are like super, super, super drum nerds would probably be like, what are you talking about? They're so different. But
yeah,
I don't know, man. It just seems like overwhelming, the number of variations of heads that are out there,
Yeah, well, and I think too, talking about how there's different models of drum heads, like Remo has this mod, like Gold Star and Chrome Fire, or whatever the different names are. But I think the three basic drum heads go back to coated, clear, and then I don't know how many people use fiber skin other than I guess Remo does that. I don't know if Evans does, but
I bet they do.
But like it seems, at least with Remo, for instance, I think the most used ones are Emperors coated in clear, Ambassadors coated in clear, and then like for the snare would be like an Emperor X or a Controlled Sound or a Power Stroke. But all of those still are either coated 2-ply or coated single, and even getting into ply is 2-ply and single ply, and then they branch out from there. But
right. And maybe this is a good time to take a quick little break, and then we'll come back and dive into some of that stuff.
Cool.
Hey, it's Dave. I thought I'd do a little story time here. Just a couple thoughts that I had. I was thinking about when Reliant K recorded at Dark Horse in Nashville, just south of Nashville, actually. And we recorded the record there. And a couple things that, first of all, the whole thing was a fantastic experience. The place is super cool, and it's been a lot of years since then. I haven't been there, so I assume it's the same now. But a couple things that I really remember that I think of a lot when I think about recording that record is, he's a friend now. We didn't know him at the time. An engineer, his name is Joe Marlette. We had him come in to engineer on it. Mark Townsend was producing, and we just had him sit in the big chair and not sit at the desk for that record, which was cool. Although I'm pretty sure he was probably just like, oh my gosh, just let me engineer. He was probably annoyed at the time. I don't know. But a couple things though that I always think about when I think of Dark Horse are there was always donuts there, just glazed donuts. The interns would bring fresh donuts every day. So it was tough to not eat a lot of donuts. And then the other thing that was pretty funny is the whole building, the whole studio is made out of like, I don't know if it's cedar or what, but it's like this beautiful, beautiful wooden building. And these bees absolutely loved it. And they would like bore into the building for like nesting purposes, I guess. So at every door, there was like a wiffle ball bat because if you're going to step outside, there's a good chance that there'd be some bees. And so you're advised to grab the wiffle ball bat and take it out with you, so you could swing it at bees if that situation presented itself. Yeah, so that's my little thoughts about Dark Horse right now, and maybe more to come in the future. Okay, back to the show. Hey guys, welcome back. Well, so I guess that let's just jump into this real quick. The number of plies, I feel like that's number of plies is a super basic thing, and I think there's really just like 1 or 2 plies. Those are kind of like the available things. Sometimes there's like some sort of overtone control where there's almost like a 3rd ply that's like a super skinny like ring around the underside of the head, which is kind of a faux 3rd ply, but it's not an actual ply.
Right.
And I guess just the difference is, from my experience, and well, I mean, if you read about it, it's super obvious. They talk about like the sensitivity of a snare head. You know, like if you take or any drum head, of course, but I'm just saying snare because it's very obvious on snare. If you put like a single ply head, or a 2-ply head on, they definitely feel different. Like the response and like the sound you get out of the snares is way different. You know?
Yeah. Well, even too, you're talking about the outside ring. A lot of heads, there's heads with like power dots in the middle.
Yeah.
Where not like, I didn't realize for a long time that they're, of course, the controlled sound and the coated Emperor, they look exactly the same. And I was like, what's the difference? And yeah, there's single ply or 2-ply, but then the thickness in the mills of the plies, and then that power dot, like, I think the Emperor X is a lot thicker ply than a controlled sound, but then even in your toms, you can have the option of some heads with that ring around it, like a pinstripe, or having that power dot in the middle, and that's your kind of your built-in muffling.
Yeah. And that's actually something that well, real quick, before we move on to that, I just want to just mention, because I don't think I did, that single plies are way more sensitive. I think I had mentioned that there's a difference, but I don't think I said what it was. So like for me, if you're going to just use like an Emperor or an Ambassador, those are like 2 really basic Remo heads. The Emperor is a 2-ply, the Ambassador is a single ply, and that Ambassador is like way more sensitive, you know?
Right.
So if you're doing like a lot of ghost notes and like lighter playing and stuff, where or even like doubles and things like that, you know, maybe a single ply makes more sense for you. Like I don't play a lot of stuff like that, and single plies tend to not hold up as long, you know. So I really like using a 2-ply head for a number of reasons, but one is just because they hold up longer. 2, because they do have a little bit of control in the overtones, and they tend to have like a fatter sound. They're not not quite as like forward and like snappy as a single ply. You know, like a single ply will just like really have like a serious crack to it. Yeah. And the 2-ply doesn't have quite that, but I think that the trade-off by just having like this fatness, and like a little more depth to the sound, I feel like it has like a little more roundness and depth to it, and that really works for me for like the music that I play. It's just like hard rock and like hitting hard, you know. Yeah. So what do you use?
I use well, I completely agree with the single ply, and the first thing I think about is like resonant heads on snare drums, which you use most of the time. I haven't seen one that hasn't been this way, but most of the time those heads are super thin, where they're already wrinkling right out of the box, because
and that's like the hazier snare side version of a single ply, which is even thinner. It's like a 3 mil or something like that, where like a top head, like if you get a single ply head like an Ambassador, it's I think a 10 mil. So that 3 mil and the hazy resonant side of a snare is super, super thin, so it's really sensitive, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, and like on a snare, that's where you get a lot of your snare wire response, is because it's so thin, it can bounce off really quickly. On my toms, I use coated Emperors on the batter, and then coated Emperors on the batter, coated Ambassadors on bottom. And so a lot of people even go with just, I think it's typical to have clear heads on bottom, but for me,
that's what I do.
Yeah, and I did that for a while, but having coated on bottom, it didn't. I love just a straight tone to ring out on my toms. I don't like a pitch bend and fall kind of thing. But
you don't. I do the pitch bend thing.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I like the coated because it seems to cut a little bit of the resonance out. Whereas if you,
for sure,
especially with the straight tone, there's so much air moving between the heads that just kind of keeps going. But that coated seems to control that on its own a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. And actually, now that we're talking about it, I'd really like to try coated heads on the bottom. But yeah, like my toms, I always do coated emperors on the top, and then clear ambassadors on the bottom. Is what I do. But I really, you know what I've really been wanting to try out are pinstripes on the top. And I've never done it.
Yeah.
I felt like growing up, pinstripes were like, oh, that's like a old 80s thing. It was like I don't know, it was like something you like, if you had pinstripes, it was not cool at all. But I think it's really cool now.
Yeah, I think that those were the first aftermarket heads that I'd ever bought for my kit, or pinstripes, because the church that I was at the time, their kit had pinstripes. And I was like, oh, these are what I get. And they do produce a really just solid round tom sound. But I've never played pinstripe coateds. I've only played pinstripe clears, and I think a lot of that round sound comes from that clear, just really sticky attack.
Right.
But I do like them. I think they hold up for a long time too. Yeah,
because those pinstripes are 2-ply heads, and are they? I don't know how thick they are. They're like 7 or 10 mil a piece. I don't know what they are. I actually have a note right here that it's 2 7 mil heads.
Okay.
And they actually, on the Remo site, it says that there's an overtone reducing agent applied between the layers. I don't know if that's like an oil or something. You know how Evans does that? They have like that series of heads that has oil in between them.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
I don't know if that's like the pinstripe. Is it a similar thing? Do you know?
I think so, because I played Evans for a little bit. I played Remo, then I tried Evans, and I came back to Remo. Sorry, Evans. But the Evans EC2s, they have that ring around the outside, and then they have like a hydraulic fluid that is in the middle of those plies. And I think that's kind of the Evans take on the Remo pinstripe.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd like to learn more about what exactly the purpose of that is. I know it's in there, but I don't know.
I think it is just another way
of reducing density or something.
Yeah, because anything that's more dense is going to vibrate less,
right?
Or it's going to reduce vibrations quicker,
right?
So it's about reducing overtones, just to control that. So if I mean, it depends on the style you're playing and stuff, of course. But if you want something that has like maybe it's a little bit easier to tune as well, but then rings less, and just has more of like a round, kind of warm sound to it. That might be a really good option for either the Evans with the oil or the pinstripe. But there's a lot of, there's so many different heads that kind of are kind of pushing that direction, that have like control rings or like the power dot. All of it's about like reducing overtones and creating mass. And that's actually a thing about the coated heads too. There's a texture to it, which is really good. People talk about, oh, it's really good for brushes. And that's totally true. Obviously, if you're using brushes, then you need some sort of texture to activate, the head to make it vibrate. But it also adds some weight, some mass to the head itself, which can change the vibrations of it. And that's why coated heads tend to be a little more like warmer. There's actually less attack to them. There's like more like mid-range kind of focus and like fatness to them. And that's why I use them. They have a different attack sound than clear, I used clear for a while, but I switched to coated like a bunch of years ago. Just more of an effort again, just to like make the drums sound fat, Right. Do you? Oh yeah, you said you use coated on top as well, right?
I use coated on top.
Yeah. And I use coated like all around.
All
Do you
around.
have any clear heads?
Other than
besides the snare hazy,
right? Well, I was just thinking too. The only other thing that could be considered a clear as far as the build is my resonant head on my kick drum. It's white, but it's a smooth white ambassador, so it just gets that white coated look. But it's I don't know. I guess
I don't even know is that a coating? I don't even know.
I think it's the
For a
color.
smooth white?
I think it's the color of the plastic that they use. And it's an ambassador, so it's a single ply. But for a while, when I played Evans, I actually used a marching bass drum head on my front.
Oh yeah.
Because it had like, for one, it was almost like a Kevlar head, kind of like it was super
Really?
thick. If I remember right. No. I'm sorry. It was like a smooth white, but it had muffling on the inside.
Okay.
Where in marching bass drums, I don't know if you know, but they use like bass drums in marching. They use both heads on both sides of the bass drum, and so it's built to take a
Yeah.
lot of impact. Well, using
Right,
it as a
right.
resonant head, it cuts a lot of those overtones out. Kind of like the same
Okay.
thing would be using a coated on toms on the bottom.
Right.
It does that, so it produces a really round resonance, but it kind of cuts it pretty quick, so it keeps your kick drum really punchy, at least in my experience.
Right. And that's always the thing that I am looking for, like in any head really, is like, I'm definitely a fan of some sort of controlling overtones.
Yeah.
Although, like I said, for my toms, I do just use coated emperors, but then
Right.
I use like other things. I use like moon gels or something on them, So
Yeah.
and that was another reason why I was like, man, maybe I should just like get some pinstripes and try those things out, just like, because it'd be maybe a similar thing. It's all built into the head. I like the moon gels because you can move the muffling around, so you can control like where there might be an issue where you're having a weird overtone, and you can just slam a moon gel on it, and you can tailor that resonance and the overtones. But starting with a head that kind of does it on its own,
Right.
is something that I've been thinking about more recently, and I just haven't done it. So I've just been sticking to my old standby, my coated emperor on my on the toms, But yeah, well, and then why don't we take another quick little break, and then we come back and we can hit up a little more specifics with overtones.
Yeah, for sure. Hey everybody, this is Travis, and I'm bringing you the tip of the day, which is how to make your snare wires more sensitive. There are a number of different factors that go into making your snare wire sensitive, including tightening and loosening the adjuster knob on your throw off, the placement of your snare wires on your resonant head, and the tension between the butt plate and your throw off. But the biggest one is widely overlooked is the tension of your resonant head on your snare drum. And an easy thing to remember in how to make your snare wires more or less sensitive is basically the tighter your bottom head is, the more sensitive they're going to be. And the looser your bottom head is, the less sensitive they're going to be. So if you have a loose bottom head, there's not going to be a lot of snare sizzle or rattle. It's just going to be kind of chunky and muddy. But the tighter your bottom head, the more rattle there's going to be, the more sizzle there's going to be, and the more it's going to sound like a snare drum. For me personally, in my snare drum setup, I tighten the bottom head as tight as I can get it, and I can tell when I shouldn't turn anymore. But I want it to get really tight, almost like a tabletop, and that's going to allow my snare wires to bounce freely when I'm playing my snare drum. So that's the tip of the day. Go try it out. Tighten your bottom head, loosen your bottom head, see what works for you. Now let's get back to the show. Hey, we're back, and Dave and I were talking about a second ago about the integrity of drum heads, and I was the same way too. I would watch a lot of cover videos growing up when I was learning how to play, and I'd see these guys playing, and they'd have these incredible drum tones without any muffling on their heads. And I was like, okay, first of all, this guy either has a really great tech, he knows how to tune his drums well, or these heads are just amazing by themselves. Which is kind of like what we were talking about with, how can you get a perfect sound at the root, which would be the head, before you get into muffling. And sometimes that's okay, especially like in studio or even live to do some muffling. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But I know in my experience, a lot of it really does come, a lot of those tones that you'll hear in songs or in covers or whatever they do have some EQing or compression being done, which I guess can be the tonal muffling. But
yeah, I mean, there's all kind of manipulation that happens after the drums are recorded, but certainly like you want to get you want to find your sound before you hit record, obviously. So,
Right.
you know, so like even in the studio, like I tend to use much less muffling or overtone control in the studio and actually way more of it live, because it's like live, it's just like keep things controlled as much as possible and like don't let things get out of control. And like tuning gets crazy live, and you're not gonna like, oh, hang on between songs, like let me deal with this tuning issue for the next 3 or 4 minutes. You know, in the studio you can mess with stuff and tuning changes, and you tweak it and whatnot, and you're like, oh, this is perfect, hit record, you know. And because you can really spend a lot more time kind of tailoring the sound after the fact, it tends to be beneficial to have a little bit extra resonance in the studio. So unless you're going for a very specific thing, in which case, you know, do whatever you got to do to get the sound right. But yeah, I tend to keep things a little bit more open in the studio. But even still, like having some of this overtone control built into the heads like might put you like right where you need to be, you know? And that's why I just said, like, I really want to look into some of these other heads instead of like using maybe quite so many moon gels or things like that. Like check out like the pinstripes or whatever. I use Power Strokes on like kick drum. Cool. I've never used them anywhere else on the drums. Did you say that you use them anywhere?
No, but I know Garrett Goodwin, he had come down for a live DrumChats thing, and he and I were talking about it, and he uses a Power Stroke 3 on his snare drum, and he alternates with that and a Emperor X, I think what he said, but most of the time he plays a Power Stroke 3 on his snare. But that's the only time I've ever played it besides a kick drum, because I use a coded P4 on my kick drum. And I've played a Power Stroke 3, a Power Stroke Pro, but I've never played it on toms or any, if that's available. But I have played on a snare once or twice.
I think they're all available on toms as well, and snare for that matter. But yeah, I use on my kick, I either use a Power Stroke 3 or a Power Stroke 4, and the 3 is 1 ply. It's a 1 ply head that's pretty thick with like a muffling ring around the underside of it. And then the Power Stroke 4 is a 2 ply head with a really thin like inlay ring for tone control. So either one of those, like I've had good luck with. And actually for the most part, I use clear batter head on the kick drum. Although I do have, actually for like the last year or so, I've been using coated on the batter, which I'm still kind of unconvinced about, but I used that on the last Reliant K record as well. It was coated. I used a Power Stroke 3 on the last Reliant K record, Air for Free. And yeah, so either one of those, the 3 or the 4, they both kind of, I feel like they kind of do the same thing. And there's just as much difference between having coated versus clear on the kick drum as the single versus 2 ply. And honestly, I just like haven't quite felt like I landed on anything yet. And I keep trying different ones out, and I don't know. I always make them work, and I'm happy with them. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that there can be subtle differences with them. I think
for sure.
I think for some people you have to have a really good ear to hear difference, especially in a kick drum. Because I played a clear Evans EMAD whenever I had all Evans on my kit. I played a clear EMAD with the much wider ring around it. But then transferring from that back into using Remo heads, I went straight to a coated P4, and that was the first time I'd ever played a coated batter kick drum head. To me, it makes a world of a difference, and I think recorded it makes a world of a difference. But at the same time, depending on if you have like one of those little Mylar dots on your kick drum, a lot of that work that head's doing is really in the aftermath. A lot of your attack really isn't being affected, in my opinion, if you're using some kind of pad on there.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. The head is a huge component. And if we're talking with any drum, but right now we're talking specifically kick drum. The head is a huge component of the sound, but at the same time, like, so if you put like the dot on like on the batter head, that changes the tone. If you depending what you're doing to the resonant side makes a big difference in the tone. And then I always have some sort of muffling in the drum, like a pillow situation in the drum. Yeah. And that changes it a ton too. So there's like so many different components to the sound, of course, you know. So it's all just kind of like a game of trying to figure out which ones, and changing a little bit of this one and a little bit of that one, and then kind of seeing what works, you know. And they all do a little bit of a different thing. But yeah, actually the switching from a clear to a coated kick drum head, I feel like does make a huge difference. And I actually feel like I do lean more towards the clear kick drum batter head, because there's like a little extra like top end like snappy attack that you get out of the clear head that you don't get from the coated head. And I really like that in the kick drum. Again, I'm playing like rock music, you know, it's like rock and like pop punk kind of stuff for the most part, and pop stuff too, but that extra snap and like punch in the kick drum, I feel like if the more I can kind of like just have that in the sound, the better. Because like when we go through and track something and record it, like we're just gonna try to create that anyway. So like, let's just try and start with that, you know?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And you bring up another good point too with control and overtones. Is the kick drum, I think there's a lot more typically that goes into just heavily controlling the sound of a kick drum, because unless you're playing like jazz or swing or kind of old school drums where they leave that kick drum just wide open, there's a lot of guys who are putting, you know, pillows or blankets against the inside of both heads to where you're really just getting a dead punch. But I do agree with you there. The clear does create a little bit more tone in the like the mid highs and the high range.
That attack like snap.
Yeah, it gives that.
And you really hear that in the you really hear that in the toms as well. It's weird. It's like a very specific difference. And if you listen to them back to back, it's like, I think it's pretty dramatic, you know. Yeah. You have to listen for it. But once you hear it, it's kind of like unmistakable. It's like this just extra like attack at field. Like clear heads seem more scooped out. Like the mids and low mids are a little bit reduced, and there's this extra like snap and punch to like the stick attack and like a round decay, you know. Whereas the coated heads definitely have a little more fullness in the low mids. It makes them warmer and kind of fatter, but less of that snappy attack thing. But again, like the tone comes from so many places when you're talking about drums, but I guess we're talking specifically heads. I keep wanting to like go down all these different paths, you know.
Dude, I'm holding my back. I'm holding myself back so much. But
I know, right?
You're definitely right. And I think sometimes it can wind up being genre specific too. I think there's guys who branch out in different genres with different head types, but it feels like a metal drummer, if you're hearing a guy just doing blast beats on his kick drum, usually it sounds like he's using metal beaters on a metal pad where it's just and just really quick cuts. But I feel like clear heads create that same sense for the toms.
Right. It's almost like a tiny, like subtle version of that. Like if you imagine like taking that and just dialing it way back. Yeah. It's like, it's that little extra like attacky thing that happens with the clear.
And I'm sure there may be some guys who do play coated heads in metal, but I can't imagine what that would sound like because of how quick that attack is on those toms. But then you get into something like punk rock, and I think my first introduction to really seeing and hearing a difference was Adam Willard from Angels and Airwaves. Like he plays really big drums. He's with Against Me now, and I think he plays clear heads now. But for a while, he would have coated heads, and to me, I always had a bad taste in my mouth with coated heads because the first time I ever tried, I was using coated ambassadors on the batter. But because of how thin they are being a single ply, they seemed impossible for me to tune as hard as I hit.
Definitely.
And so I think a lot of softer playing guys like jazz and maybe even funk or something, those kind of players are using ambassadors because they're sensitive, but they're not hitting them as hard. But then when you get into rock drummers like yourself and myself, the 2-ply holds its tonal value, not only its life durability, but the tonal value as well, because it's ready for that abuse. And so I think that that's why, for me, I can imagine certain genres using coated heads on their toms and certain ones using clear just for that atmosphere, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a tonal difference between the two, and guys who play different styles, and I play different styles of course as well, but like, you know, people know me mainly from Reliant K and other rock things. Attack Hat, it's a thing that I did for a while, and then, but anyway, so like most of that stuff's just like, you know, kind of heavy handed. It's just like slamming the drums basically, you know? Right. So like it definitely, durability is an issue. But also it's just about like fatness, and just like I'm creating plenty of attack by like kind of just like how hard I'm hitting the drums, you know? So I just want that. I want that added like fatness and durability. But like, you know, if people, studio drummers, who are like play all different kinds of stuff, like they'll have kits set up already, like, oh well, this is the kit that I use for this is the kit I use for that, and it's not necessarily that those kits do specific things themselves, but they're set up in a way that like the heads are specific to one thing or another. Like you can make the same drum sound very different. So if you have two different kits available and you can kind of set them up so that they're really lending themselves to a specific sound, you know, and I've got a few drum kits that are different from like wood materials and then the head type, and they just sound like so different, you know? So guys who are going to do some studio work or whatnot, you know, depending on what it is, they might just change out all their heads. If they only have one kit, they're like, oh, well, I definitely need like clear heads for this or whatever. Right. And the most obvious thing would be to really tailor your snare drum for a specific, type of style or song itself. Like even within the same project, like on Reliant K recordings, like, you know, I'm not using the same snare on every song, you know. I'm using different snares and different snare heads depending on what the song I feel like it calls for, you know. And so I'll try and do that, and then whoever's producing, Mark Townsend's guys produce most of the Reliant K stuff, a lot of it, and you know, we'll be like, oh, I don't know if that snare's working or whatever, you know. And a lot of it has to do with the head. The tuning, of course, is an issue. The drum material is an issue. There's all kinds of things, but the heads definitely create a huge part of the sound, you know?
Yeah. Well, and like you said, it's one small component in getting your tone. And that's another topic we'll be covering pretty soon is, you know, different shell sizes and different depths. And I know you and I have talked about it before, when you and I did an interview a while back, we talked about how odd your kit is compared to most, I guess, in the depths and stuff. But that's another thing to remember too, is that your heads, while it's just a head, it's a part of your tonal sound altogether. Where I mean, you can't make a 16-inch or you can't make a 12-inch tom sound like a 16-inch tom because you changed your drum head. You have to get a certain depth, but we can get into that at some point in the near future. But yeah, I think that there is a lot to be said about just drum heads, where a lot of people think, oh, I just need to swap out a drum head. But there really is, I wanted to mention it earlier, but I think there really is, it's a huge deal picking the right head for the right sound. Speaking specifically, I was thinking Remo and Evans and Aquarian, and I don't know a whole lot about Aquarian other than the Super Kick 2, their kick drum head. I think that's their most prized piece, but Evans and Remo tend to have the same kind of guideline as to the type of head, whether it's you know, the Remo pinstripe would be the equivalent of like an Evans EC2, and then the Evans G2 and G1s would be the same as like an Emperor and an Ambassador. But Evans has a snare head. I don't know if you've seen it. They haven't. I think it's the SD dry snare drum head, and it's got like little pinholes all the way around the outside of the head, and it's super dry. There's like no overtones to that head at all.
Yeah, I think it might be ST dry.
Oh, okay. Yes, you're right. I think there's HD and ST.
Oh, yeah. So, because they make a couple different heads that come in the dry version. Yeah. And those are actually super cool. They're super cool. They have like a really unique sound that's like way different than anything else. And you're right. It has like tiny pinholes kind of like all around the outside, and it just like kills resonance or overtones. So it's like super snappy, and it's just like really dry. It's almost like throwing, what are those things on them? It's just like a 5 mil or 7 mil like overtone control. There's like the rings that that people, like manufacturers make, but then there's also
like big fat snare drum.
Yeah, there's like that thing, which is just like a 10 ply or a 10 mil piece of Mylar or whatever that you throw down, and it just makes it super fat and really, really dry.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like the Evans dry heads kind of have that same type of thing. Maybe not quite as fat sounding.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have like all that weight to it necessarily, but it has that kind of dryness where it's just like a pop, and it's just like done. You know?
Well, and that's a prime example of, getting your tone before adding muffling. Like Evans is already doing it to where you don't have to add a big fat snare drum or drum tax or whatever else is out there. They're already hitting it at the root. Like, we don't want an overtone drum head. Let's just punch holes in it and kill that overtone at the source,
Right. Man, and I know we're trying to like blow through this stuff, and I knew we were gonna like really want to go down all these different roads, and there's like so many like little bits and pieces that we can like really get into details about.
Yeah.
And we just don't even have time to do it, but it's crazy. I feel like we've just raised like a million questions.
Right.
Like if you don't know much about drum heads, or you're maybe not a very experienced drummer, I really feel like what we just did is just like create like 100 questions for someone to be like, what in the world? Like, we keep blowing by like certain things like, oh, the EMAD or whatever. Just like we're mentioning like little things that we don't even say what it is, We're just like, so like, I know that we're raising all kinds of questions, but hopefully that's cool. Cause maybe something that we said will, cause people to go search on the internet about whatever, some random thing that we said. But speaking of the EMAD, actually, that was one thing that we didn't really mention, and that's the I guess we've got like the EMAD, which is made by Evans. There's the Aquarian Super Kick, which you mentioned, and then Remo is the Power Stroke Pro.
Yep.
Are all of the like foam, built-in foam muffling,
right?
And I think it's pretty much just for kick drum, right? That'd be ridiculous to put them anywhere else, right?
Well, the Power Stroke Pro, there's two different ones. There's ones with the foam ring that you can, it's kind of like a Remo version of the EMAD, but then they have one where there's like a snap-on pad at the bottom of the kick drum. I've never gotten to play one, but I've seen it. But Evans actually, I have seen. Well, maybe somebody's using like how some guys will play like an 18-inch or 20-inch kick drum. I've seen where guys will use an EMAD for that kick drum on their floor tom. So they'll kind of make use for it on their toms. But I think you're right. That series is just kick drum minded. Does that make sense?
It has to be, right?
Yeah, as far as I know. And then I've seen where guys would put big fat snare drums and stuff on their toms, but that's the only instance of that kind of head being used on a tom, is I think they're using a smaller kick drum head on their floor tom.
And really, and like to me, it seems like the whole point of the foam muffling, again, that makes it feel like it's only for kick drum. I mean, again, I think it seems ridiculous to put it anywhere else, and I've never seen anyone do that, but like, but it's kind of the same idea as throwing a pillow or something in your kick drum, like just touching the front head. It's that same idea. It's like, it's just built-in foam muffling that controls all kinds of resonance and overtones, and it just makes your kick drum like super dry and punchy, and then it's done, And I think that is definitely why Aquarian kind of is included when I mentioned them kind of being in the big three, because that Aquarian Super Kick is like so popular. And I think I only used one or two times I put them on. I wasn't a huge fan of them, but like I've seen so many people use them, and they sound great. I just felt like it didn't work for me. I don't know. It sounds great. And again, that's going back to Dave mentioning the sparking a lot of questions. Also comments. Like, if you're an Aquarian player, like, I don't know much about Aquarian other than that kick drum. Dave, I can't speak for you, but like,
yeah, if you know more about Aquarian than Remo, hit us up and be like, hey, this is what I use on these heads, and Evans players as well. So I would like to know more about that and these other companies we were mentioning, like Earth
Yeah,
Tone.
we're looking for that. We're looking for that one person who plays attack. we want to hear from you.
Oh, geez. Yeah, well, unfortunately, we're running out of time. And Dave, we said it multiple times before, but we could go down a rabbit hole on Drumheads. So with that being said, if you guys have questions or comments, feel free to go to drumchats.com and connect with us there. You can also reach us at Travis@drumchats.com, Dave@drumchats.com, and you can reach out to us at our social media as well. So please light us up with questions and comments on heads. We want to hear what you guys are using, not just what we're using. Right, Dave?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So with that being said, you're listening to the Drum Chats podcast. Stay tuned for our next episode, and we'll see you next time.
See you guys.